This is the armchair that George Washington actually sat in during those grueling constant sessions trying to get the Constitution together in the Constitutional Convention. Now, James Madison recorded an interesting statement that Benjamin Franklin made. So picture this. They're trying to get this fledgling government off the ground, and they finally worked out the Constitution. And as they're getting near the end of the people signing it, James Madison said that Benjamin Franklin commented to him and said, "I've often looked at that picture behind the president without being able to tell whether it was a rising or setting sun. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun." So Franklin had his hope that their ideas of how to govern this fledgling nation would be proven over time. But honestly, the data wasn't in yet. So Franklin really wasn't sure yet if their ideas were rising or setting as far as the nation. Thankfully for us, it did prove to be rising. Similarly, throughout time, as science has advanced especially, people have wondered, is the sun rising or setting on religion? The difference is, in this case, the data is already in. So now it's just a matter of each of us having to look at what has come in and decide for ourselves what beliefs will govern our lives. So this presentation, it's going to have 3 parts. First thing we want to do is just give an overview of what are we talking about with science and religion. Next, I want to provide a simple flow chart. People get so confused on this issue, and they also think it's just too much information. There's no way we can know what's the real relationship between science and religion. We'll give a simple flow chart, and it makes it, there's only so many options. And then finally, we want to apply this to you. Why is this important to you? It's important to you because you are the watcher. And if you understand what the relationship is between science and your beliefs, you'll be in a much safer position and you won't end up like this poor guy. This is known as the surrender cobra. This is one of the last times Michigan has lost a game and it didn't go the way we were expected. He was totally caught off guard, and that's why he's doing what's known as the surrender cobra pose. I don't want anyone like this when it comes to their worldview beliefs coming home. So here's our targets for today. We're going to explain theology in science. I replaced the word religion with theology, and I'll explain why. I want you to be able to have just a simple analogy to understand these complex terms. Second, we're going to look at what the real relationship is, not just between science and theology, but between every field of study and theology. And then finally, you're going to forget 99.5% of what you hear in this lecture, in any lecture really. But just try to grab 1 or 2 things to walk home with. And one of them is, how can you know if there's a God behind anything? I'm going to show you one way using science, and we're going to apply it today. All right, so science and religion. Picture yourselves as a watchman of, let's say, a giant house, and you have to stay in just this office. How do you keep track of the whole house? Well, you have to have cameras. And you have to have a lot of different cameras, because even in some rooms, let's say a big room like this, you'll need more than one camera to cover all the corners and whatever. So that's how you can be reasonably assured you are aware of what's going on in your house. Now, science and religion, the reason why I don't use the word religion in this case, and religion is more how we organize around a belief system. I use the word theology because it applies more directly with science, and I'll show you why. I view science and theology as different ways to gain knowledge about reality. So science has its own perspective, its own viewpoint, field of view, what it can see. Science comes from the perspective of using the scientific method to learn about the natural world. So it has a very specific perspective and field of view of what it can see. Theology, on the other hand, it has a different perspective. It doesn't It can use the scientific method, but it doesn't focus on it. Theology is the study of God. Well, science is going after a study of nature. Theology is study of God, and it can use either your own pursuit of God or even communications from a God, if a God exists. So it's a different perspective. It has a different field of view, but sometimes they can overlap. And that's where the really interesting stuff can happen. Some claim they can't overlap, but that's what we'll look at. So science and theology, they're just different methods, the way we gain facts about reality. It's the cameras we use to make sure we're aware of what's going on in the house. All right, so as for targets for today, first one we've already done. We have just a simple analogy. So if you want a basic one-statement thing, they're just different methods to gain knowledge with different fields of view, kind of like security cameras. I've actually had, within just a couple months, 3 different parents at 3 different schools. They sent either letters to me or talked to me on the phone and said, we had a teacher tell our child that they either had to believe what they were being taught in our science class or what their parents teach them about religion. They can't believe both. So I wrote a letter to the school district and said, I'd like to have a public discussion on this, because anyone who says that either doesn't know science, doesn't know religion, or doesn't know either of them well enough to be educating anybody. No one picked up. I said it nicer than that, though. But no one took up the offer either way. So here's just a basic analogy, just to keep it simple. All right, now, we're already on part 2. In order to take what are all the possible ways that science and theology can interact? There's only a handful. And we're going to walk right through them to make this a lot simpler. Okay, so the first thing we got to ask is, and there's only 2 options on this. Either both of the things we're trying to study, whether it's science and theology, or let's say it's theology and philosophy, or some other fields of study, we got to know if they're valid or not. Let me give you an example. Astrology. Using the zodiac signs to predict future and so on. All right, it'd probably take me 15 minutes. As long as I had several weeks worth of predictions that the zodiac makes, or through the astrology, and this is big. 25% of Americans believe in astrology, and any tabloid that adds a horoscope, what the data shows is they get, I think it was 250 million extra subscribers. I'll have to check that again. It blew my mind, though, when I saw it. So, but the thing is, with astrology, and we won't do it right now because the time's more limited, but if I just had enough weeks worth of their predictions, in 15 minutes I can show you astrology adds nothing unique or new accurate information. It is just white noise. So you should turn this camera off. It adds nothing unique or new. On the other hand, if science and theology are both valid, then both of them have to be able to add unique and accurate knowledge to our database, to what we know about reality. They have to view things uniquely and accurately. Now, right now, I'm telling you both of them do, but you'll just have to trust me until we get further, and then we'll give the proof for it. And here's the thing, though. When I say science and theology, we cannot lump all belief systems together. By the law of non-contradiction, wherever different belief systems, atheism, and I count atheism, agnosticism as belief systems. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, wherever they contradict each other, and they contradict each other on the foundational points of those belief systems, only one at most can be accurate. So what that means is, when you're studying, let's see what the relationship is between science and theology, you have to pick a specific theology to look at. In this case, we're going to focus on Christianity, because Christianity is on a level of connection with science that no other belief system matches. But when you're talking about, are they both valid and add unique information, it depends on what theology you're talking about. All right, second step. Again, there's only 2 options. So first, we got to know whether they're both valid or not. Second, we have to act, do they interact or not? So how I got into this topic and wrote this, is that I'm going to turn into a book. I was reading an article by Stephen Jay Gould. He's a Harvard professor. He has better if you list his credentials, it's longer than the article I wrote on this. But in his Dorothy, Is It Really Oz? I was so shocked by how narrow-sighted this brilliant man was when he's talking about science and religion that I got narrow-sighted and I almost removed myself from the gene pool walking into traffic. When I got shocked back, I was like, okay, let's just break this down and look at it. So what he claims is, his theory is called NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. These are magisteria, science and theology, and he says they're non-overlapping. Never the twain shall meet. They can't interact. He said something like, science gives us facts about the natural world, and that doesn't belong here. He just gave some vague thing about, well, theology is just about ethics and spiritual things. So, and he said they never meet. On the other hand, what's the other option? They do interact. And there's basically, if there's anything that both science and theology comment on, add accurate information about, they're interacting. So we're going to show you pretty quick, and here's a great example. Our origin story sits right here. Both theologies and science have added new information about this, and we're going to use that as our example later. So as far as interaction, this doesn't work. So where are we at now? We're at science and theologies are going to interact. They can both add accurate information, depending on what theology, and they interact. What do we have left? Type of interaction. Now, this is harder to see, so I'll just make it. Now, this is how simple it is. We're done. This is the end of the flow chart. There are only 5 possible ways, general ways, that science and a theology, like Christianity, can interact. And they're on a continuum of agreement. Over here is the conflict theory. It basically says that the more science advances, it just eats away and disproves religion or theology. That's the conflict method. Complex contextualize we'll get into. Here's mine, symptoma. We'll talk about that. And at the other end, we have proof, and we have completely overlapping magisteria. And that's it. We're going to have a decision between these 5, and then we're done. This simplifies it. All right, so let's start with the extremes. Let's move from the extremes. First of all, conflict. So the idea is, here's what religions and theologies have been giving us, but that the more science advances, it just eats away and disproves it, and science becomes bigger, this gets eaten away, until eventually it'll just go away. God of the gaps, that whole thing. On the other end is completely overlapping magisteria. This was given by, I think it was William Dembski. He was giving a talk at the biggest apologetics conference in the country that I've seen. So he was the plenary speaker, and he was actually giving a talk about information, I think. It was an excellent talk. But he tied into it his view of here's the way science and religion actually go together. They're completely overlapping. All knowledge is God's knowledge. Hard to argue with that. If you believe there's a God, that's hard to argue that. But I did. So when it was over, he got a standing ovation. It was an excellent talk. But I sat in the front row because I disagreed with him and I wanted to get my question first. So I raised my hand, and he said, yeah. And I said, well, so I agree with completely overlapping magisteria, but it doesn't really fit with what's the relationship, because you're taking it from God's perspective. If we had God's perspective, we have all knowledge, yeah, then it's completely overlapping. But we're trying as humans to figure out what the relationship is. We don't have all knowledge yet. You talk about humility and brilliance put together. When I said that to him, so I basically said, your idea is wrong, here's what I think it is. And his no defense mechanism kicked out. He literally went like this. As soon as he's done here, he went, you're right. he just said, that's right, that is. And then he thought for another second, here's 2 examples that prove it. And he shot out these 2 examples, neither of which I had before, so I had to write them down. So this, not unless we have God's knowledge. So that's not a possibility as far as the relationship. But what about if we take it a little step lower? Let's say if we just say, well, we can get proof that God exists. I don't believe in this one either. Here's my thoughts, you can have your own. But science doesn't believe in proof. I mean, you have laws, but they don't even really call them laws anymore. They basically are saying, well, we just have so much evidence supporting this that it is, we just accept it. We can run our lives thinking that this is true, and the probability against it is so small. But they don't like saying proof anymore. I don't think God has the goal of proof either. God is not in it so that we believe that he exists. Propositional knowledge. Even the demons believe he exists. He's in for a relationship of love and trust, which requires something a lot more profound than proof. If God just wanted us to get all the information and put it in the right equations and prove and earn our way to heaven, heaven would look like this. Just a bunch of geeks. Except for Penny there. She wasn't really smart as the others ones were. So I don't think proof works either. So where are we at? Let's look at the conflict. Now the conflict theory, you might, probably most of the people I run into still think that this is valid. It really became popular around in the 19th century. You had these books coming out, History of the Warfare, with science, with theology and Christendom. You have, and then even today, I mean, Carl Sagan's passed. He doesn't believe in conflict theory anymore because he actually knows the truth because his time on earth is done, so he knows. But current people like Lawrence Krauss, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Sam Harris, they still promote the conflict theory. Now, these people are all brilliant in their fields, but you can be brilliant in your field and have other things impact you. And if you actually go with what the scholars of science and religion, so when I say modern historians of science, I'm talking about people who, whenever I say scholars or modern historians of science, those are people with PhDs who spent their whole career in this field and they're writing peer-reviewed literature. The consensus with them is this: conflict model is wrong, regarding Christianity at least. Since these focused on Christianity, they did too, and they said, we reject the conflict model. There's been misrepresentation, inaccurate scholarship. There's actually only few conflicts, and there's often interplay and support. So my thing is this: if you believe that science and Christianity, you can say theology in general, but let's focus it, have a conflict, if the conflict theory holds, if you believe that, I would ask you, why do you believe that? You're going to have to provide evidence better than what the historians the historians of science, the scholars' consensus is. So you better have some good evidence, because they reject that idea. But I'm not throwing the conflict theory away. Now, if you want to read some of the people who shot down the conflict theory and moved on, and I'll show you what they moved on to next, here's these names listed here. I'm not going to read through them all, but they're there in case you want them, and I'll have the PowerPoint available for you to get it. But here's the thing. We have to keep the conflict model because of the law of non-contradiction. All the different belief systems, they contradict each other on foundational points. So all of them are going to have conflict with reality, except for one, at most. So we need to keep the conflict model. Second, even the belief system that is accurate, whatever you might think it is, if you think atheism is accurate, if you think agnosticism is the correct way to view the world, if you think Christianity is, even if it is accurate, you will still have some you will still have some conflict because people are involved. As soon as you get people involved, you have external factors. You're not dealing with just data, you're dealing with emotional factors, other human issue factors. You're dealing with incomplete knowledge. Whenever you have all those other factors, even with the accurate belief system, you'll have conflict. So we're going to have to keep this model around. And then finally, the big question. Here's what really needs to be asked. Is this apparent conflict or actual conflict? Let's say you think you found the belief system that fits reality, that science and every other field of study will support, but there's still going to be some conflict. The question is it apparent or is it real? Let me give you a good example. We're going to talk about the Big Bang later. We'll do evolution right now, since that's a biggie. Miraculous, I have a talk called Miraculous Misunderstandings. That's another area of apparent conflict with science. But let's see. Evolution. Now, I'm not going to read through these. This was like a summary. On Darwin's Day at the University of Michigan, I was invited to give a talk and then have their evolutionary professor come at me. So I gave my talk. I said, I kind of summarized where our knowledge was at. And then at the end of the talk, my main thing was, bottom line is, this is not even a real player in the issue of whether God exists or not. Because even if evolution was absolutely accurate, there is not a single evolutionary theory that says, and God was not involved, because it can't. Science has a specific field of view, which we'll look at in a second. Now, when I gave that talk, it was Q&A time, so now they're waiting for this professor to go at me because they know he's pretty vocal. And so we were just standing there waiting, kind of awkward silence. And then I said, any questions? And I used that thing that Frank Turek says. I'll say, I know asking the first question is hard, so we'll skip right to the second. Still no one said. Then finally the moderator, the main guy, he said, sir, we invited you so that you can kind of go at it with him. That's why we're here for a little debate. Do you have anything? And he said, oh, yeah. He mistranslated this one word, a Jewish word, or Hebrew word wrong. I'm Jewish. And I said, okay. And I said, well, we can talk about that, And I said, it doesn't really have anything to do with the talk, but okay. Is there anything else? And he said, no. And the moderator's like, so you agree with everything he said? You don't have anything else you're going to shoot down about the science part? He's like, no. And that was it. Wow. Here's why. If he he got this. I don't think other people did. That's why everyone else was shocked. But I got it. Science is only able to view a prescribed field of view. It will describe nature and events using initial conditions and natural laws. So even if we had here's one example. We're going to do this one in a minute. For example, it can study about our origins, how the beginning of the universe was. But it can't tell you if there's a cause outside the universe. It can see some properties that you might need a cause outside, and we'll get to that too. But here's the thing. Let's just say we have a petri dish in front of us, and we see non-living life become living organisms, and then it evolves into all the different life forms we've ever had. What does that mean? Well, it just means we saw how naturally things could happen. It still says absolutely nothing about whether there was something outside of its field of view involved. But what the study of evolution and the biology does show us is this. When you study DNA is found to be mathematically equal to language or code. Language and code only comes from an intelligence in all the science in everything we've ever studied. That's why Bill Gates, when he learned about DNA, he said, it's like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Yeah, no kidding. The information storage capacity of DNA dwarfs anything that we've ever created. In just a teaspoon of DNA, you can have the information to store what you need to build every organism that has ever lived on the planet and every book ever written. There's other things you can learn too, like when you start studying these, the different molecular machines, multiple Nobel Prize winners, what they're saying is, well, we just saw what was already in nature and just copied it. When you're trying to cheat on a test, you don't study from an Oklahoma University football player. You don't copy off him. If you're the smartest people in molecular biology, you don't copy off non-intelligence. All right. So what's the relationship between Christianity or any theology and science or any field of study? Well, here we have it. If they're both valid, we know they interact. We know we can't get the coma completely overlapping yet. Only God has that, or proof. Here's what we have left. Conflict is still in play. It's going to fit for every theology that's not accurate. And even with the accurate one, it'll slip here sometimes because it's an apparent contradiction. So many people think evolution disproved God. That's here. All right, here's what we have left. Just two. This is the most recent one, aside from mine that came after this. But this is where most of the historians of science are right now. So we've got just three left now. Relationships are complex. Whenever you can have the two smartest people, but when they're going to marriage counseling, you'll often hear, oh, it's complex. That's the way it is in any kind of relationship, even between science and a theology. So what this newest theory it was saying was, and it's been out now for a while, but what it's been saying is, all right, you have to look at just everything. Evolution, the Hittites. Do the Hittites exist in history or not? You have to look at every situation, whether it's in history and where it ties in with theology. And you have to just determine, okay, is this real? Is this a conflict? Could it be resolved? Is it apparent? And what they're saying is, because we don't have all knowledge yet, and because there's human factors involved, you're going to have this kind of relationship with every kind of thing that comes out, every new study that comes out between science and a theology. Now, the good things about this is it accounts for the data. I mean, we looked at even evolution itself. And what it shows is, even if you have an accurate theology, it can be shown to be proven true, or it can be shown to have agreement with science over time, but sometimes it looks like it doesn't. And this is why. You have other factors involved. But here's the problem with it. It only explains each situation. Like, why does evolution, or why does the beginning of the universe have so many people thinking it supports atheism? Well, they said you have to look at each situation. But it doesn't tell us what we really want to know. What we want to know is what the truth is. We have to govern our lives based on a belief system. And here's the thing. The big questions in life about God and where do we go after we die, these are what we use, our view of life is what we use for, it gives us our thoughts, our choices, our goals, our direction in life. It's our foundation. If it's on an accurate belief system, we will have secure and expected outcomes. If it's on an inaccurate belief system, we will be dropped into unexpected consequences that we will not like or be able to be free from. So we want to know, when we're talking about relationship between science and theology, we want it to use it to know what's true, because that's what's going to impact us the most as the watcher. So the theory that I have, and when I say this is just like anything else, heavily borrowed from what's been done before. So I call it a symbiotic trending overlapping magisteria. Symbiotic, actually, John Clayton he's a geologist. He came up with this probably 3-4 decades ago. He said, relationship between Christianity and science is symbiotic. It's mutually beneficial and supporting of each other. For example, clownfish and the sea anemone. Clownfish can use the sea anemone for protection, and the clownfish by going in and grabbing some food outside in the sea anemone, it picks up like dead stuff that's in there after the sea anemone has eaten something. It cleans it out, and it causes oxygen flow to go through. So they both really benefit each other. That's a symbiotic relationship. And that's the relationship that an accurate belief system and science, and really an accurate belief system in any field of study, history, philosophy, geology, will have. Here's the part that I added more. People can have, when you have complex, contextualized issues like evolution, the Big Bang, and so on, you're going to have opinions, misinformation, hopes. You're going to have all kinds of different claims. Trends overwhelm all of them. So if you want to know what's true, if you want to get past opinions, emotions, and all the other different things, you just look at where the trend lines are going. Because over time, think about this just logically, over time, reality cannot help but support one belief system over all the other ones that are contradicting it. That's how reality works. All right, so what's the relationship between science and Christianity? It's a symbiotic, trending, overlapping magisteria, symptoma. Now, I call it this also because I like how it sounds like symptoms. It has the symptoms of an accurate model, all of them. For example, it accounts for all the accurate points in all the other models. It includes the conflict model. It includes the complex contextualized model. It vastly expands the explanatory scope to include the trending over time and every field of research. Like I said, this isn't just Christianity and science. Christianity is going to interact with history, philosophy, and so on. And actually, every belief system has to. It provides what we want is actually truth. That's what we're really looking for. That's why we need to know what the relationship is between science and different theologies. A reality cannot help but lift one belief system, the one that's accurate, on a level that none of the others can reach. And we have that. The data's in. It does provide a number of predictions to confirm its validity or not. Let me go over some of those. I have them listed out in the book, but I have like about a dozen of them. Non-interaction models are going to be falsified further. Less than proof is the upper limit for the Christian theology. There's likely a history of complex contextualized examples. Mutual support will occur between Christian theology and other fields of knowledge. Religion will furnish conceptual framework in which science can flourish. William Lane Craig, Reasonable Faith, touches on this. Science can both falsify and verify claims of religion. Multiple layers of checks add reliability to a field and extend the overall circle of knowledge. Religion can help to adjudicate between scientific theories. Science can establish a premise in an argument for a conclusion having religious significance. Again, Reasonable Faith has done this when William Lane Craig does his talks with including science. Trends will be evident over time toward concord and mutual support between Christian theology and science, and we'll see an opposite trend line for all the other contradicting theologies. And then as far as another big way to test whether if you have a good model or not is does it lead to future inquiries? And we're going to talk about that because aside from the fact that institutions have been created, even Cambridge University and Oxford now have science and theology chairs established. There's journals. This is just growing. The interaction between science and theology is just growing. So there's more and more inquiries. Okay. This is for those who think science isn't their thing. All right. So if anyone's, with this group, it's less applicable, but a lot of people just say, well, science isn't my thing. So this is where I'm going to tune out and just kind of think about, I'll think about what my to-do list for today, or I'm going to think about daydream, all right? But that's not. Science is all of our thing. We've all done it naturally since childhood. We just don't know what the terms are. Let me give you an example. Possibly my earliest memory. So here's the basic steps of scientific method. One of my earliest memories was, it was even like before kindergarten. I was in some kind of class where we had about 10 kids or so. I remember coming out of a van and we all had to hold hands going through the parking lot, going to this museum where this guy's going to read to us. So when we sat down, there was a guy sitting, then there was students holding hands, teacher, and then holding hands, and then me at the end. Now, I was like ADHD, so I got bored really quick. And so we're holding hands, listening to a story, and I look over, and I'm like, there's an open electrical socket. Observation or problem. I mean, my young little mind, I went through all of these steps. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was like, if I jam my hand in there, will it just shock me, or can I get it to go all the way around to get that guy? Okay. Hypothesis, the second step. It's a theory or model. I was like, I think I could do it because I know my mom told me if I stick metal in, it'll go through. And sometimes when I grabbed a barbed wire, or I saw someone grab a barbed wire fence that was electrified and they touched someone, it worked. I think it might work. Testing data, the fun part, I made sure I hit all the 3 prongs that I saw, and a back straightening jolt hit me. It went all the way around and got the guy. Conclusion, yes, I can get him. And now I'm sharing my results. So science is all of our thing. We all do this naturally, and now what we're going to do is I'm going to illustrate exactly how we have science and Christian theology in a symbiotic relationship. All right, and we're going to go through the scientific method while we're doing this. So this is just completely invalidates Stephen Jay Gould's NOMA model just from this. All right, let's start with an observation. We exist. All right, most of us can agree on this. Some don't, but that's a whole other talk. But our universe, nature exists. If we exist, there's only 2 possibilities. Either there was a beginning to all of this nature, or there was not, and it was eternal. It always existed. Nice and simple, only 2. Theories. Here's where it's also nice and simple. They made it very easy for us. The general view of science, primary belief of atheism, agnosticism, every other belief system not founded on the Bible, and common experience told us universe is eternal. Sun goes up, sun goes down, happened yesterday, will today, will forever. Everyone was thinking it's eternal. The Bible's over here. Not only is the Bible alone over here, it also gave some other things that can be checked. Step 3, test and data. The evidence is in. Vilenkin, he's one of the top cosmologists who was studying this. He said all the evidence supports there was a beginning. And whenever I give this talk, I always say, all of the evidence support there was a beginning. There is no evidence supporting that the universe is eternal. When all the evidence is on one side, and there's no evidence on the other side, even a graduate from Ohio State University can figure out what that means. Forgive my angst, Michigan fan, and Ohio State they've made my life miserable for years. They got a great team. Vilenkin, he said this. He said, we've done the tests. And it is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of the cosmic beginning. So that's our tests and data. What does that mean? Ooh, I got to get rid of that. There we go. Here's what science now knows. All nature, all the matter, energy, space, all the matter of the universe came into existence. So all of it had a beginning. Time had a beginning. Space and time began together. It called the fabric of space-time. There was nothing at all, not anything of the universe, then a small, dense, hot universe that released no light. So even if you were there to watch the beginning, you wouldn't see it because light's not being released. It's dark. And then the space-time fabric begins to expand and decay following fixed laws. Well, that's what science now knows with modern science. That's what the Bible knew thousands of years before. And here is all of the verses that spit it out. And this is what bothered us. So even at churches, I'd have, it used to be most, now it's about half. Most of the people, when I say Big Bang, what does it support? Atheism or the Bible? Almost everyone said atheism before. Now it's about half and half. It's getting less. But I was like, even the people who The top atheist at the time, Sir Frederick Hoyle, who had the steady state theory, he said when he heard there was a beginning, he's like, that's scientific Genesis. What was it, a Big Bang? He's calling it a Big Bang to kind of make fun of it, and that's the name that stuck. But the bottom line is, this was predicted precisely. When it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, heavens and earth don't mean heavens and earth. When you stick them together, I think it's called a merism. It means, it's like butterfly. It doesn't mean butter or fly. It means something totally different. When you shove them together, it means all things of the natural universe, all matter, energy, space, and time was created. Now, if some people have accused me, oh, you're reading science back into the Bible. I'm not reading science back into the Bible. The Bible had that thousands of years before I was born. And those closest to the discoveries who are atheists or agnostics, they get it. Here were their quotes. Now, how atheism got to claim the Big Bang as theirs? They must have the best marketing team, because the beginning of the universe is all Bible, and it's called out. Here's what, let's see, this is Robert Jastrow, head of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies. Here's what he said. He was an atheist at the time. Astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts in Genesis is the same. This is Penzias and Wilson, Nobel Prizes for discoveries relating to the Big Bang. They said, basically, if I had nothing but Genesis, books of Moses, Psalms, and the Bible as a whole, I couldn't have predicted what we found any better. Frank Tipler, mathematical physicist, he said, you know, I never thought I'd be saying this, but Christianity isn't a religion, it's an experimentally testable science. Now, let me just illustrate how serious these predictions are. Remember, every other belief system, everyone got it wrong, but thousands of years before modern science figured out clear, specific. For example, let's say that right now I say, you know what, if you dig down through the floor right here, you're actually going to find some cat remains. If you go right over here, directly 5 feet in front of him, you'll find a hammer cased in the cement. If you go over to one wall, tear away the drywall, you'll find a plank is a little bit shorter than it was supposed to be. And if you go over to the other wall over here and dig through, you'll find somebody took some artistic liberties behind one of the walls. Now let's say your curiosity gets the better of you. And after we all go away, you sneak back in here and you jackhammer down there and oh my goodness, there's a cat skull, a hammer. You find all 4 of these things. What does that mean? There's only a few options. Am I just a good guesser? Is it just coincidence? I just guessed those 4 things just right. Or I was either there when this building was made or I'm in contact with someone who was. Those are your only options. What's your choice? You realize you have the exact same choice with the universe. It predicted things no one should have known. I went to UC Berkeley and I proposed that I gave what I just gave you. And there was hundreds of atheist graduate debaters and undergraduate and the professors. And I asked them, if you don't think the Bible's a God behind it, if you think it's just man-made, well then show me, then there's going to be plenty of other man-made sources that give clear, specific, multiple predictions 3,000 years in advance of modern science. What are they? Silence. They said, oh, the Bible has errors. I said, okay, you saw what you just did. You went off on a rabbit trail. We can talk about that. Even if there was an error, even if the error said that, and I keep going to football, sorry about that, I need to mix this up more, but even if the Bible said that the Cal Berkeley had a good football team, we know that's complete falsity. Even if it said that, you know what the primary question is? Is there a God behind the Bible? Because if there is, you better take it seriously. Humans can't do this. If you think there's an example, if you think this is just man-made, give me all the other man-made examples that can compare to this. And I can give you a dozen more predictions. Dead silence. And I say, oh, silence speaks loud, doesn't it? I let it go for a really long, awkward time. See, this is scoreboard. The place of interaction between science and Christian theology, you can study some things. The beginning of the universe is one, but there's many others. That gives you scoreboard. I can show you how serious scoreboard is in a minute, but here's the conclusion. So we just went through the full scientific method. Conclusion. Some of the greatest discoveries in science regarding our origins show us science and theologies interact. It shows that all these ones that went against the Bible have an error, inaccuracy in a foundational part, their origin. On the other hand, the Bible got it right. That's symbiotic. And then it says a test for truth. Multiple, clear, specific. So how can you know if there is a God behind something? Think about that for a second. I'm running short, so I'll make it quicker. You can know there's a God behind something if it can do, well, you at least have to have something beyond human capacity. And if you don't think what the Bible did here is beyond human capacity, show me the other human examples, because you'll have a lot more throughout all history. All right, so last target for today, how can we know that there's a God behind Bible? Needs to be on, so if you want to take home, this is one of the biggest take homes right here. You want to know there's God behind something, behind the Bible? You're using science here, so this is a perfect example of symbiotic interaction. They're helping each other. It needs to be beyond human capacity, and with science, we have now shown it. In fact, that same Robert Jastrow, he has that awesome quote where he said, you know, coming as atheist or agnostic, he said, us scientists were scaling the mountains of ignorance. We were finally getting near that peak, our origins. And right when we get to the top and learn about our origins, there's a band of theologians who've been sitting up there for centuries. All right. One activity was I was going to ask how many questions or challenges are answered just by this. Some of the biggest questions, Christians of blind faith, how can you believe in supernatural? All these are answered with just showing there's a God behind the Bible. And here's what I'm really looking for. Here's a kind of what I'd expect to see if Christianity and theology, or Christianity is accurate. Whatever the accurate belief system is, you'll have a trending upwards as research goes on through time, and every other belief system, you'll have the trending downwards with conflict. In fact, what I would like to do, I don't have the time to do this, but anyone who does do this, please contact me, because you could do a whole dissertation on this. If you take, let's say, history, or philosophy, or science, show all the things that were found, some peer-reviewed literature that shows an interaction that would support, and have the ones that are negative. You'd have to get some parameter to give them values, measured it, but over time you could trend it. And you could make an awesome display, because you could click on any of these and get the example of, okay, here's something that shows a possible conflict, is it apparent or not, and so on. All right. And just so you think I'm not just saying there's trends, let me just show you an actual one that has been graphed. Luke Barnes is a physicist. I grabbed this from him back in, this was 2011, but here's basically, when they started finding fine-tuned features of the universe, that things had to be exactly right for the universe to have our kind of life, they thought they would just go away in the early 70s. But instead they found more. So here's all the number of articles per year that are found, and look at that trend. So what's the trend? Every month or so, there's a new article supporting fine-tuning design, and it makes it if you do the probability, it makes it 1,000,000 times less likely that it was chance alone without a designer. Okay, so what's the real relationship between any belief system? If it's inaccurate, it's going to be here and here, conflict and complex. If it's an accurate belief system, and if Christianity is, it'll be here, symbiotic, trending towards support, and complex contextual. So here's just a summary. Many fields of study or camera views overlap with theology, and we can't help but trend towards mutual support with accurate theology and conflict with an inaccurate theology, and this trend will overwhelm all false information, opinions, and hopes. That's the symptoma model. All right, so what does this mean to you as a watch person to conclude? All right, this is my Michigan team. The situation was, this is my nightmare actually, the situation was all they had to do was kick the ball and stop them one time. Just kick the ball and tackle them, game's over, against one of their arch rivals, Michigan State. And me and my friend snuck out of a physics conference to watch the end of this game. We're looking through this window watching the game, and he's like, he sees these Michigan State fans who are just totally downcast. And he said, you see those guys? That's me. And I said, yeah, it should be you. The game's over. And he's like, okay, what Michigan State needs to do is that they need to block the punt and then run it back in without getting tackled for the touchdown. I said, yeah, that's what needs to happen. And then it actually did happen. There's my Michigan team dropping the ball. They throw it right into their hands. They run it all the way back. Remember those old, there was a couple of older gentlemen that they said, the surrender cobra. So the guys, he said, remember those downcast guys? And he said, oh, look at them now. That's them now. And then, that's them. And then when they showed the surrender cobra guy, I knew it was a perfect opportunity. So when they showed him, I said, you see that guy? That's me. All right. The reason why I show you this, not because I want Michigan to experience this again today, I'm showing it because you are a watchman in the house of the universe. And there's a verse in Ezekiel that specifically talks about it. It says you're responsible not only for yourself as a watch person, but for others around you. You're responsible. So, as far as here's what, so what, now what, here's what we learned. There is a very specific relationship that an accurate theology will have and what inaccurates do. So what? Well, that's going to determine whether you're guiding your life right or not. So now what? Now you have to be a good watch person. Because the bottom line is this. If you're not basing your beliefs on the accurate theology, the information's out there. Reality can't help but make one show which one is the accurate. If you decide, though, to turn off that theology camera or turn off any of the cameras, you don't like history because it's fuzzy. You don't, or philosophy because it's fuzzy. You don't like theology because you just don't like the view. If you turn off any of those cameras, it could be from that darkened corner of your house where disastrous consequences enter. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So you'll have time for Q&A.
Oh, yeah.
So two rules real quick for Q&A. First rule is please be sure to ask a question. David is going to have a microphone. I will have a microphone. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you. Again, important point, please ask a question. Some people go on and on and on and on telling us what they think about the subject. If you need to set up your question, that's fine. But please get your question so other people can ask their question. Second rule, I'm the president, I get to ask the first question.
Good.
So,
that's usually the hardest one for.
if I understood the trend, mm-hmm. and you talked about the trend several times, and I think that one of your points was if you watch the trend usually leads to truth. Is that fair?
It will, yeah, basically. So when you look at the trend over time, if it's trending more and more towards mutual support, the positive relationship, the one accurate belief system will show that trend at a level none of the other belief systems will reach. In fact, inaccurate belief systems over time, you will see the downward trends towards conflict theory.
So my question is, an atheist might respond, well, you might notice that we tend to be trending secular, that more and more people are embracing atheism, whereas according to the trend, fewer people are embracing theism. So how would you respond to the atheist on that point?
First, I'd say, what do you think that means? I would say, do you think that's because, I would leave it to them to say, like, what do you think that's telling us? That atheism's accurate because more people are believing in it? Is that the main point? Because I think that's what they'd be getting at. What I would say is, though, I would say the trend you're looking at is one of those ones that has very much human factors involved. I'd say, have you considered all the factors? For example, K through 12 education, we've removed God and really in university, we removed God from the schools. Now, when you remove God from the schools, I know why we did that, because I was a public school teacher. You don't want to indoctrinate, but now, when you're teaching that we can explain everything without God, you're doing indoctrination. It's like having a court case where you have the prosecutor step up, give his full case, and you're the jury. Prosecutor gives his full case. That's like K through 12 education in university. And then when it's the defendant's turn, the defendant stands up and the judge says, sit down. Okay, jury, make your decision. That's a situation we have right now with our education system. So even though that's trending that way, that is heavily involved by external factors. You need to just focus on the evidence. If you think atheism is true, show me the evidence how it's trending. So,
Okay. Excellent.
good question.
So, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd love to get a copy of that slide of the 6 truths of science lining up with the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
I've got 2 questions. Not covered is, what are your thoughts about the origin of the theory of the multiverse? And what are the implications of that?
Great question. Okay, so multiverse. For those who, first of all, it makes wonderful movies. I love it for the science fiction movies. But currently, multiverse is primarily science fiction, even in science. But not entirely. So Max Tegmark, he's the guy who came up with the 4 levels of multiverse. Because he said, we have different theories about the multiverse. Here's 4 general types. Now, one of them is just that our universe is just bigger than what we can actually see. So even with our best radio telescopes, whatever we have, whatever we see and we think is the edge, there's probably a lot more beyond that we just can't see. That, Max Tegmark called that multiverse level 1. I think that's a misnomer, because that's just part of our universe, but that one is almost certainly true. Then there's a level 2 multiverse. Forget which one that one is. I think level 3 is the bubble universe, where there's some multiverse generator and it kicks out little new universes like bubbles. And then there's the one, level 4 is any possible thing that could possibly happen, has happened an infinite number of times in infinite universes. That's the far end. Now, the only evidence we have is for multiverse level 1, and that one's pretty certain. But that's not really a multiverse. Level 2 in the bubble, they have some possible thoughts on that, but right now it's still in the realm of interesting idea, not valid, not scientifically strong. The level 4 gets into absurdities. And even the bubble universes, let me just give you, Brian, and here's how it applies to theology. So one reason they tried to, when you have the universe having a beginning, all of nature having a beginning, you need a cause that's outside of nature. A transcendent or supernatural cause, beyond nature. And it has to be beyond time. Now, a lot of scientists believe that the universe was the eternal thing, so we don't need any kind of cause to explain it. When they found out the universe had a beginning, they ran to every different possible theory they could come up with. Well, maybe it doesn't need a beginning. Maybe there's a multiverse. But then Board, Guth, and Vilenkin was the one guy who had that quote about proof. They spent 10 years and wrote 5 seminal papers on this issue. What are all the possibilities of maybe not having a beginning? And they said, even if there is a multiverse, it still too needs a beginning itself. So you just pushed it back a step. So it doesn't hurt the argument that if you had a beginning, you need a cause that's outside of nature, outside of time, more power than the universe, and a bunch of other features that we could talk about in another talk. I do that, the cause of the universe, there can be only one. We'll cover that there. Now about fine-tuning. They try to say, okay, they're coming to the point where they're saying, okay, yeah, having all these fine-tuned things come out just right. It's like you have a giant dashboard in front of you with 1 million dials, and all the dials have to be tuned precisely right for the universe to be here. They said, that really does strain chance. So mathematically, you look like a fool trying to support the fine-tuning argument through chance. But they say, but if you have infinite chances, well, then anything can happen. So it would take away from the fine-tuning argument, except a number of. Here's the main thing I think. Brian Greene did a talk about multiverse, and he shows he's trying to give all his reasons why it makes all these bubble universes. That there's just this multiverse generator, and he said it's kind of like a French horn. A French horn is just shaped in a certain way to produce sound in certain ways and produce different sounds. But a smart observer would have said, hey, Brian Greene, in your TED Talk, French horn is designed. In order to make those specific sounds, you have to design that. So if you have a multiverse that's actually spewing out multiverses that are trying all these different things to get the fine-tuning right, you still have to have a multiverse generator that requires fine-tuning as well. So in the end, it makes for great movies. It doesn't have enough support right now for the kind of multiverse you need to go against fine-tuning. It doesn't stop the big, need of a cause argument. So it's not an enemy to us at all. If they show a multiverse is true, fine. I doubt it, because the evidence just isn't pointing that way. But if they do, it doesn't hurt any of our big arguments that God exists.
So the level 4 would basically be the monkeys typing Shakespeare.
Yes. Yeah, what you would have to believe for a level 4 multiverse to be true is everything in this universe is exactly the same except you're wearing a red shirt. And that's a true universe somewhere else. And there's another universe. Everything's the exact same, but you're a Michigan fan. Everything's the exact same, but people have blue skin. You look exact same, but you have blue skin. Anything that is physically possible or not logically impossible is going to be true an infinite number of times in one of those infinite universes. There's a lot of ways you can just show that that's just
I heard one scientist make the point that in such a multiverse, then it would also guarantee that you have a universe where the biblical God exists. So
no, that's
not very good.
That's a nice shot.
First off,
Oh.
Number 3.
Yeah.
First off, thanks for coming. I
Oh,
appreciate you being here. Two questions, and they're kind of related. The first one is, how does your model take into account science's influence on our understanding of Scripture? 6 days of creation being a good place to start. And second, do you have some examples of where Scripture has influenced the direction of science?
Great question. So first of all, if it's symbiotic, they're going to help each other. And sometimes helping each other is helping remove stupid theology. For example, Galileo. Galileo was a believer, so was Copernicus. And when he got into a fight with some leaders of the Catholic Church, and really Aristotle's view at the time was that we're the center and things revolve around us. That was Aristotle's view. And everyone was holding it at the time, except for some people like Galileo, Copernicus, and so on. So the church, many in the church held that. And they would try to use verses, we're fixed, we can never be moved. There's some verses that can make you kind of think that. But what Galileo was saying is, no, we are most definitely not having everything revolve around us. And he said, you're misinterpreting the Scripture. You're going beyond what the Bible actually says, and that's dangerous. So in that case, science helped bad theology. And it's still doing it today. There can be some more examples. What was the other question? I'm sorry, I forgot the second part.
Go the other direction. How has the Scriptures influenced the direction of science?
So one thing is, I've heard a good argument, I think it was Hugh Ross who said this, where the actual kind of methods used in science where you give an observational frame, you tell where your frame's at, and that he said Genesis actually does that, and who was? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out what sources to point you to have the full more details on this. But basically, when science said that we can know God through what he has designed, that is basically saying there's kind of, you can have the book of Scripture and there's the book of nature, where you can learn some of God's qualities just by studying. So you have Newton and some of the most of the founders of the modern fields in science were Christians learning how God did things. So that was one thing. The whole beginning of the universe. Now, while there is some examples, like the beginning of the universe when the Bible claimed that, most of the things in the Bible, since the Bible is not a scientific textbook, if it was, it would have said, in the beginning, God synthesized deoxyribonucleic acid. It's not trying to teach us science. It's trying to teach us what God did and so on. But it does make some claims that can be tested by science. And most scientists have not taken advantage of that. If they did, it would have led to other discoveries. For example, Hugh Ross just did a thing where he said, where God is lecturing Job, said, where were you when, and so on. One of the things he said is, can you bind the something of Pleiades? Can you loose the belt of Orion? Can you guide Arcturus? Now, those things just, it sounds like God's just lecturing them. Scientists have found science to back those things up, though. So Pleiades is a group of, I don't know how many, 250-some stars. And the amazing thing about it is scientists have recently found they are traveling in the exact same direction like a swarm of bees. So they are bound together. And there's an article on that. The belt of Orion. You know those three stars that are equally spaced kind of in a perfect line? It's really beautiful. You can see it out in the night sky. That's like the belt of Orion. So while God said, can you bind Pleiades, keep them together? And they are staying together in their course. He then goes the opposite direction. Can you loosen the belt of Orion? Well, this star and this star, they all have Arabic names. I can't remember, pretty names though. This one over here is not just a star. I think it's a 3. I think there's 3 stars there. It is actually, they've now measured that it's measurable. It's moving away from the other 2. So it is loosening the belt. When he said, can you guide Arcturus and his sons? Arcturus, so I think it was, there was some astronomer who said, if you have a star going more than 12 meters per second, if it's traveling in space at 12 meters per second, that's a controllable star. Anything more than that, 25 meters per second. Our sun is going at about 12 meters per second. 25 meters per second means it's controllable. Arcturus is going something like 250-some meters per second. And it's about 1,000 times bigger than our star. When astronomers have studied it recently, they said, this is a one-of-a-kind runaway train. It is so monster. It's like a cannonball. See, most stars, as they're moving, they get affected by the gravity of other stars. This thing is such a monster, it's like a cannonball going through tissue paper. In fact, it's such a big monster, it's carrying, I think it was 50-some other little stars behind it in its stream. That's its suns. You can't see those. Only astronomers recently have seen those. We had no idea there was that. So if the Bible did use some Bible verses, they could have led to some more things, but most of the time they don't. And since it's not a scientific book, you're not going to have too many things. But cause of the universe, I can give you 6 things that the Bible predict about the cause of the universe, that if scientists would have just been looking in that direction, it would have added so much to their studies. Is that all right with? All right.
Yes. I've got a question about your Bible, which is, you call it Symptoma. And I found it very interesting, especially with your story about giving the talk with the people with the evolutionary model. Now, that doesn't preclude the existence of God. So, theistic evolution or evolutionary creationism is that God's behind the physical universe, the operating system, the analogy or the algorithm, and all life. So, theistic evolution is a concept that people like Francis Collins endorse.
Right.
And I find it interesting myself. It's sort of RTD, sort of so it's not really got here yet.
Right.
How do you compare, or do you support the theistic evolution or evolutionary creationism within your model of symptoma?
Good question. So there is definitely apparent conflict between Christians and the evolutionary model. But the question is it apparent or not? Since there's so much evidence in every other field of study supporting Christianity, my guess is it's going to be apparent. So what I do is, I'm not a biologist. And I've had talks with biologists, and so much of it, I said, okay, we need to stop here because it's going over my head. What I just like to do is, and I tried to make this simple. I was a public school teacher, so I try to make this simple that we can use because we're supposed to be the watchmen to help others as well. We're called to. So what I tell them is, just cut the legs right out of the whole argument. And I say, even if evolution is true, so even if theistic evolution is true, great. The Bible doesn't necessarily, I don't think the Bible precludes it. But in the end, the Bible has been shown accurate where even like in the beginning of the universe where science isn't. So as far as anything to do with evolution, I always just say, even if it was absolutely true, it has nothing to do with whether there's a God or not. So you can be a theistic evolutionist and be a Christian. That's fine. We have that range. Even with young Earth, old Earth. Here's another interesting example. Real interesting example. This ties in with what you said, too. If Christians would just be better about reading their Bible instead of just taking in what was taught, I think that would keep them from some problems. Here's why. As far as young Earth and old Earth, there are Christians in both camps. And that's what I tell them is, it's not a salvation issue, that's fine. I said, but don't argue, don't let that be your main point when you're trying to talk to someone outside the church, because no one outside the church believes it. You are creating a stumbling block, and God is going to call you to account if you cause someone to stumble. And so if you read more of the Bible, there are things in there that, like for example, I just say this, I was like, where in the Bible do you get an age? So it's not a salvation issue, so this is just something we can discuss. All right? Where do you get an age in the Bible? And I just try to make them answer that. They almost always have to bring up genealogies, but then I just point out, well, you have to make 5 assumptions about the genealogies. They all have to be true, but I can prove biblically they're all false. I won't even use science. So the only way you can get an age of the earth is if you step outside the Bible. That's extrapolating. As soon as you do that, you're not on safe footing anymore. Safe footing's over here, where you're sticking to the Bible. So as far as theistic evolution, as long as they don't go outside the Bible and extrapolate and then claim that's part of God's word, I'm okay with it. And they might be right. I personally don't believe it. I think evolution shows all the hallmarks of a dying theory. Dr. Mancha, he's going to talk about epigenetics. You'll see some of it there. But even if it was true, I don't care. It doesn't preclude that there's a God, and what we do know about how things evolve and origin of life points to the exact need for a God.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with your presentation.
Thanks.
And I like your proposal for symbiotic trending. My question is, or observations, not so much a question as an observation. And you mentioned it in the last sentence of your talk before you stopped.
Okay.
And that is, if you take that lens of theology or that camera of theology out, you're left with the dark side of the room, and that leads to danger. But then you stopped. But that danger, we see trending today. We can set up, an observation and what the Bible predicts and what we think is going to happen, and with all the really, really horrific stuff we're seeing in today's society, it's people rejecting the fact that there's already truth and they don't want to believe it, they can't believe it, and they're driven to anger and dysfunction and radical behavior. And that's, to me, that's part of psychiatric and psychological science. And perhaps it should be integrated in some way, or maybe a next book.
So When I said I want some if any of you are going to do one of these studies, you could do a dissertation on it. Contact me. I want to work with you on it. You just hit a big one. So psychology has its field of view. It can see this. You bet Christian theology crosses over it. And in that interaction, you can predict things that you're seeing right now. In fact, there was a professor who was on the West Coast. He didn't give his name because he was not a believer and he didn't want it to be publicized, but I think it was Josh McDowell who was talking with him on a plane. And the professor told him, this student, now this guy is so big that when he gives a talk, his lecture hall of hundreds even has people sitting in the aisleways, including other professors. This is how big this guy is. He's in psychiatry. So, and my wife, she has a doctorate in psychology, so she could also add, she does daily things that, the Bible says this, and wow, don't we see that being true? So they asked, one girl came into the professor's office and just said, what book or what can you give me I just want to live a healthy psychological life? He said, I can't think of anything more concise or perfect as far as to have a healthy life than the Sermon on the Mount. Is that true? What if we lived by the Sermon on the Mount? What would our culture look like? What would your daily life look like? You can test that. And you can also test what happens when you ignore that, which is exactly what you were saying. So that would be evidence that is going to trend over time. And the further we get away from God, the further we'll see it. Yep.
I really enjoyed your example on the scientific method. You were grabbing a hold of the exposed outlet.
You're a troublemaker then.
I know. You can tell right away. So my question is, when you did your write-up, did everyone in the chain feel the shock, or did just the first person and last person feel the shock?
So now that's a question that my memory does not get. I remember all the steps. I thought I remembered seeing that guy get it because he was my goal. But I can't, in my head, I can't picture what happened with anyone else. I thought he jumped, and that's the only thing I was looking at, but I can't remember.
So you felt it, and you think he...
I'm trying to remember so I did get a back straightening jolt when I did this at my house, to me. When I'm picturing this, I cannot remember if what my pain was or what my feeling was. The only thing that was going through my mind after seeing it work was I was thinking that they're going to know I did this. They're going to know it. So I can't remember. I'm sorry. I'd like to do better justice to the example, but I can't picture it and see what happened. Oh, did you have something from that, though? Is there, something behind it? Because, right now, I want to test it. If we got enough people, I want to... Yeah.
Hi, Joey Schmidt. I'm doing a PhD here in physics at UT. So
awesome.
I hate this stuff. I see it. Recently, I've been kind of delving deep into mathematics, the mathematical frameworks and Gödel's incompleteness theorem and
awesome.
What you can prove and can't prove with kind of logical systems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it, at least to me, kind of all these fields, the underlying framework or baseline seems to be logic and logical rules, like when you said the universe had a beginning or it didn't. That's a
law of excluded middle. Yeah.
And so laws of substitution, things like that. And I guess my question is, if humans have limited senses in that we can't see specific color ranges and things like that.
Yeah.
And is there, I guess, what do you think of the limit of human logic as it currently stands? Because it seems like there's there's God's logic and then there's human logic, and human logic can only extend as far as we understand it.
Right.
So if I give you an axiom of cat, dog, peanut butter, jelly, you're like,
Yeah.
But to a divine being, to God, that may make perfect sense. And yes.
No, that's a good question. You have a really creative mind. You might want to theoretical stuff's probably going to work good. You'd be good with that too. So, laws of logic. Okay, well, first of all, you are totally right. When you're talking physics is standing on logic, everything does. Philosophy is like the foundation that everything is standing on, because you have to use definitions, ethics, you have to use logic when you're doing any of these thought things. Now, the thing about logic is, remember I said before, like, even science doesn't really want to talk about proof anymore. It just says, with all the evidence we have, the probability that this is true is here. The likelihood that it is not, if you want to believe this, you're kind of being irrational. Okay, laws of logic are like that. All the evidence that we have supports law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle. We don't have anything that goes against them. I think there was an Arabic leader philosopher who had said something about for the person who doesn't want to believe in the law of non-contradiction, basically saying two things that contradict, they can't both be true. He said something like burn him and torture him until he realizes not being burned and tortured is very different from being burned and tortured. They're not the same thing. So the laws of logic have been verified in every way that we can do. So they're pretty darn reliable. And I think when we're made in the image of God, God operates on that. And he wants us to operate on that because that's how we get through life. I mean, why would God put us on this planet? Well, I think if God really wants to have a relationship of love and trust like he had in the Trinity even before we were here, you have to give not only freedom of choice, but you have to have some time to learn things. And we learn through cause and effect. And you need logic to do that. So I think He's got that in our mind too, so that we're in, in order to learn the cause and effect and learn what he wants us to learn, it's pretty stable. Yes?
We'll make this the last question. Yes. If we know someone who's an unbeliever, who's a scientist, practicing professional scientist, and we can get them to read just one document of yours, a PowerPoint, book, article, what would you have us send them to read?
I would do, this is just through so that's a great question. You guys, fantastic. Your questions are excellent. I really appreciate that. I do try to specify it to the person, but when I just go on campus, like I went to UCLA and I had some mathematician professors and some physics professors and so on, and at Berkeley, the same thing. The one that blows them away is the cause of the universe. There can be only one. And I can send that to you. In fact, that's a talk I did over for the Alabama group that they really liked. That one, it should send shivers down your spine when you look at this. People have in their mind that there's no way we can know what the cause of the universe is. There's no way we can know. And what I say is, well, how do you know that? How do you know that you can't know? Have you looked? When I brought this up at Berkeley with this one professor, so we went there to have a debate between some high school kids that Sean McDowell was training when he was a high school teacher, and Brett Kunkel brought them there. They were debating some graduate teams. We were supposed to have lunch with them and kind of interact with them, but the atheists, the professors and the main debaters went to one table. So I went to that table. And when I was at that table, and I said, just so you guys know, I'm on the other side. Then they started getting me with questions. And they were better debaters than me. So many of them were way smarter than me, but it wasn't a fair fight. All the evidence is on my side. So what I did with him was, he's like, wait, you just have blind faith. How can you believe there's a God? And I said, cause of the universe. And I said, just the very short version of it is, I said, well, in all scientific and philosophical literature, there's only 4 options. 3 have been completely disproven. There's only one left, immaterial mind. And that was predicted, the properties of that, and then I gave him the properties. This was predicted thousands of years ago in the Bible. No other source does that. He literally went like this. And so this atheist table, they're all trying to gather each other up and support each other to come at me. And a couple of theirs got dropped with different arguments, so now it was just this professor to take me out. When he heard that, he goes like this, "That's right. How come I never heard this? How come?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I know. That's why we're doing this. The information's out there." And you could just see him like processing it. And so that one is the one that I would use because I've used it with mathematicians. I've used it with any group of scientists I run into. That's usually the first one I go to.